Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are doing a deck tech for Teval, the Balance Scale. Teval is a 4/4 for 4 with flying. He's a spirit dragon, and whenever he attacks, mill 3, then you may return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, and whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, make a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. So this is some Sultai reanimating lands. So why play him? 4/4 with flying on your commander is no joke. Like, I know it's like not a huge stat block and it's nothing crazy, but like that can kind of like beat people down with commander damage way faster than you'd think, especially when we're incentivized to attack. He's great because he also enables our grave just by milling 3 on attack. We're ramping every single turn by reanimating a land. We are so land heavy in this deck, I would be shocked if we miss. And then since we're ramping every turn, we have so much more mana. More mana means we can cast more cards means we can do more things, and our opponents don't like when we do that. And he also just floods our boards with 2/2s. Just whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, you just make a 2/2 that's untapped, so we can make a lot of 2/2 zombies off him pretty easy. So although he is great, we don't need him to win. Early game, we just want to fill our grave as much as we can and start ramping. Mid game, play him, start making tokens, start ramping even a little bit more, getting more and more mana, more and more tokens. And then late game, we want to amass armies of tokens and outvalue opponents with mana and card advantage, just because we'll have so many cards in our grave, so many cards in our hand, so many creatures on the field, and so much mana to work with. So channel and deck stuff, right? This deck's pricey. Land decks just are, right? When you gotta run like fetch lands, and fetch lands are like 20 bucks each, and all of these other crazy important lands that are all like $10 each, it can really add up. Really just cut whatever makes sense for your budget, right? $765 is very high, so do what makes sense. Don't run all the shock lands or all the fetch lands. Do what makes sense. Get the cards you do buy from the link down below, and then as always, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Going into creatures, we have AC Tyrant of the Gyre Straits. He drops an additional land on our turn, and then whenever a land enters, we draw a card. So the big theme of this deck, right, is playing a lot of lands, sacrificing our lands, or milling them, basically getting them to graveyard, and playing lands over and over and over again from our graveyard and sacrificing them, so we can just keep making all of these, like, just zombies with the commander and a couple other things. But, so playing additional lands is big, and then whenever a land enters, we draw a card, which is really nice. Ancient Green Warden is sick. Reach, you may play lands from your graveyard, which is a big effect. And then if a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it does it an additional time. So if something has landfall or whatever, it doubles up. Ashaya is great. Power, toughness, equal number of lands, and just all of our non-tokens are lands, which is really good because, believe it or not, there's a lot of board webs that are like destroy all non-land permanents, and Ashaya helps us dodge all that. That's not the reason, but basically everything's a land now. AOZ, super sick. When he enters, make a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land we control. So let's assume in a vacuum we play him on curve and we play him for 7 mana. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a 1/1 counter on each plant creature you control. So on turn 8, we are now having we're now having 7 1/2s, and then turn 9 we're now having 7 2/3s. But that's in like the worst case scenario. The likely case scenario is we're dropping this guy like turn 5 and we're getting like 5 tokens or whatever, and then we're having multiple lands enter. So eventually, like in a turn or two, like we're having like an army of like 5/6s or whatever. Azusa lets us play 2 additional lands a turn. Dryad of the Elysian Grove lets us play an additional land and makes all of our lands basically each type. So now all our lands tap for any color. Again, the big thing is we want to play as many lands as we can every single turn by getting them to the graveyard and then replaying them from the graveyard. Elvish Reclaimer gets +2/+2 if there's 3 more lands in our graveyard, so I guess he can be like, I don't know, 3/4 for 1 mana, which is pretty good late game. But really, we want to pay 2, sacrifice a land, search our deck for any land, and put it on to the battlefield tapped. There are certain lands we want. Gilt Leaf Archdruid. I want to highlight this guy. I love this card. There's never been a really good deck to play him in, and I finally have a reason to put him in any list I've made. Gilt Leaf Archdruid. Whenever you play a druid spell, draw a card. Guys, I don't think that's happening. We maybe have a couple druids in the deck, but tap 7 untapped druids you control. Gain control of all lands target player controls. Now, the cool thing about the commander, right, is he makes zombie druids whenever a card leaves our graveyard. So we can tap this guy and all of the druids we make, 6 other druids, to gain control of all of our opponent's lands. That honestly just says target player loses the game. Like literally, and we're doing that like every single turn once we get to those amount of druids. So we're just stealing lands. He's so cool. Gravecrawler, he can't block, but you may cast this card from your graveyard as long as you control a zombie. Gravecrawler is a really big deal in this deck because he goes infinite with a lot of things in this deck. We're not planning to go infinite, but Teval cares about cards leaving the battlefield, and he leaves the battlefield as long as we have a zombie, and Teval makes zombies. So we can just constantly like pay a mana or just recur him over and over and over again. There's a lot of ways to do that, which we can see. Loot Exuberant Explorer. Play additional land, pay 6, tap them, look at the top 6 cards, reveal a creature card with mana value less or equal to the number of lands, and then cheat him into play. He's good. He's good in a pinch. He's fun for instant speed. Play additional land, he's pretty good. Lotus Cobra, Landfall, just kind of our mana's doubled up when they enter. Lumra, Bellow of the Woods. When he enters, mill 4, and then return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, which is super sick because we want to be doing a lot of that. Obviously, if we have a lot of lands in our grave, we want to get them all to the field and then sacrifice them and then get them all back again. Muldrotha is just very good general value for Sultai. During each of your turns, you may play a land and cast a permanent spell of each permanent type from our graveyard, which is really nice because we do a decent amount of, like, I guess, milling and just having stuff go to our graveyard. So when Muldrotha's like, Oracle of Moldiah died, I guess, like, we can just use it for our creature for turn and get it back, or someone blew up one of our artifacts, we can get an artifact back and play a land, which is still pretty good. Oracle, though, lets us play an additional land, but we got to play with the top card of our deck revealed, but it does let us play the top card of our deck if it is a land. So pretty good, again, playing a lot of additional lands. Rampaging Ballast makes us a 4/4 whenever a land enters, so again, another great way to just make a lot of tokens, because that's honestly how this deck plans on winning, is just making a lot of tokens and just beating down. There's a couple locks, there's just like, lands are just really annoying to deal with, because there's not a lot of things that directly interact with lands. And they're very recurable for us. So Rampaging Ballast, just when we're having a lot of lands enter the battlefield, when we're making like even 3/4/4s a turn, which is not even that good. 3/4/4s a turn is not too bad. Ramanub Excavator lets us play lands from our grave. So we have to have a good balance of playing additional lands and being able to play lands from the graveyard, because that's what makes this deck really cook. River Kelpie is really cool. Whenever it or another permanent enters the battlefield from a graveyard, draw a card. Whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, draw a card. And it has Persist, so when it dies, if it had no -1/-1 counters, you return it with a -1/-1 counter on it. So, like, it kind of will draw a card. We're really going for that top ability, because we're going to have a lot of, like, lands, because they're permanents, enter the battlefield from the graveyard, so it just draws us basically every time we reanimate a land, which is really good. Scoot Swarm is Scoot Swarm. It's brutal. Landfall. Whenever a land enters, make a copy of them if you have 6 or more lands. If not, you make a 1/1. We play a lot of lands, so like he doubles up. First you have 1, play land, now you have 2, play a land, now you have 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 356. That's as high as I can go real quick. But either way, we make a lot of Scoot Swarms. Sidisi Brute Tyrant enters or attacks, mill 3, good. Whenever 1 or more creature cards are put into our graveyard from the battlefield, we make a zombie, so pretty good either way. Like, we want to mill, we want to be able to just get stuff in the graveyard, and it also just floods out our board with 2/2s anyways, so pretty good. 6 is really good. When it attacks at mill 3, and we can put a land from among them into our hand, and then it gives our stuff retrace, so we can cast our non-land permanents by just discarding a land, which is fine either way, because it's just good recursion, and we don't care if we get lands in the bin, because we want to reanimate them anyways. So really, it's there to give our non-land permanents retrace. Like, if Sidisi or Sylvan Safekeeper die, like, we can just get it back really easy. Sylvan Safekeeper, sacrifice a land, target creature you control gains Shroud until end of turn. So if someone tries to target kill one of our things, it gets Shroud just by killing off a land. And again, we don't really care if we have to sack a land, because it'll get back anyway. And it's honestly, even if we don't have to, like, even if we don't want to give our stuff Shroud, sacrificing lands is still good in this deck. So it's like a good engine for it. Tatyova, Landfall, land enters, draw a card, gain a life, good. Gitrog, Death Touch 6/6, love this card. He's a frog card. He was, ever since he got revealed, I loved him. You may play an additional land on your turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a land unless you sacrifice Gitrog, and then whenever one or more lands are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So if we sacrifice a land, if we mill a land, if we discard a land, we're drawing cards, and he helps us do a lot of it, and he puts lands in our graveyard, which is good either way. The Scarab God is a weirder choice for this deck, but hear me out. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses X life, and you scry X, where X is the number of zombies you control. And then we can pay 4 mana, exile a creature card from a graveyard, and we basically eternalize it. We make it a 4/4 zombie, and then if he dies, we return it to our hand at the beginning of the next end step. So Teval makes zombie druids, right? And a decent amount of them, and we also have some other good stuff in this deck, which we'll probably see immediately after if we see Tormod, but a lot of stuff that just does make zombies, incidentally, like Sidisi makes zombies. So it's pretty good, and we can also just start snagging things from graveyards, our opponents and our own, if we want. It's just good value. We scry a lot, gain a lot of life. Our opponents lose a lot, which is fine. It's good. It's good. Tireless Provisioner, Landfall. When a land enters, we're almost always making a treasure token. There's very little scenarios where we're making food. We're always making treasure when lands enter. Tormod the Desecrator. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, we make a tap 2/2 zombie, and he has partner, which doesn't matter. Again, we're having a lot of our land cards leave, so we're making a lot of zombies. Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, is just good. When he enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it's escaped. And then when he enters, we gain 3. When he enters or attacks, gain 3, draw a card. Then we put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. And then we can escape him for 5, which is just exiling 5 other cards from our graveyard. He's good, right? He's good because if we escape him and we have him on the field, he's a 6/6 that enters and attacks to gain life and draws cards and then ramps us. And like late game, if we have like some cards that we're really not doing much like in our graveyard, if we get like instants or sorceries in our graveyard, like we can exile them and just like start cheesing them back into play and like looping them, which is good. Warren Soul Trader, pay a life, sacrifice another creature, create a treasure token. That's really good. Again, like this is a good card with like say Gravecrawler, right? Where we pay a black mana, we play Gravecrawler, we then pay life and sacrifice Gravecrawler to then make a zombie off Teval because we cast a guy from a graveyard, and we make a treasure. So it's a great way to get us a lot of treasure, and we just got to find a way that gains us life. White of the Reliquary, Vigilance, basically +1/+1 for each creature card in our graveyard, and then we can sack another creature to search our deck for a land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Making sure it's not basic lands and just any lands is really, really big because there are specific lands we really, really want. World Shaper attacks to mill 3, then when it dies, we reanimate all of our lands, which is just good. It enables the deck, which is nice. Farseek, Nature's Lore, and 3 Visits are in the deck for the same intents and purposes. It is to get Shocklands, it is to get Dryad Arbor, it is to get Triome. That's really what it is. Farseek gets everything tapped. Nature's Lore can make those forest cards be untapped, like it can get us untapped Shocks, and it can get us untapped Shocks, untapped Dryad Arbor, and like everything else that enters tapped normally, like the Surveil lands and the Triumph, are going to be tapped regardless. So good ramp either way. Light from the Loam returns up to 3 target land cards from our graveyard to our hand, and it has Dredge. We're probably not dredging too much because there's a decent amount of mill in the deck anyway, and like we just want to sacrifice what we have on the board. So dredging isn't crazy important in the deck, but Light from the Loam's really great, especially if we have cards that like lands that we want to repeat the effect. Like any of the discard lands are good. Scape Shift, sacrifice any number of lands, search our deck for that many land cards, and put them on the battlefield tapped. We just do the old switcheroo. There's no real crazy combo with this. It's just like sacrifice a lot of lands, get a bunch. It's pretty good. Splendid Reclamation, return all lands from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Again, just a lot of mass recursion because we want to like sacrifice a lot of like our lands. Just get them all back. Torment of Hailfire is, I think, honestly a win con in the deck. Repeat the following process X time. Each opponent loses 3 unless that player sacrifices a non-land or discards a card. Now the cool thing is since we are a big mana deck and we get a lot of lands, we can make X really, really big. So when our opponents, if we do like even an X15, which isn't even like unreasonable, our opponents are now staring down the barrel of losing 45 life, or sacrificing their entire board, or losing their entire hand. Usually has to be an include of both of them. But like at that point in the game when we're paying like 15 mana for this, like people probably don't have a super full hand, or maybe, you know, it's almost always a kill spell for someone. Going into Instance Assassin's Trophies just gets rid of something we don't like. They can have a land. Constant Mists, we are always buybacking. Creatures deal no combat damage this turn, and the buyback is sacrifice a land, which we have to do. Someone tries to attack us, it's like, yeah, who cares? We'll pay 2 mana and get rid of a land, which we want to do anyway, and we won't take anything. Crop Rotation, sacrifice a land, search our deck for a land card, put that land on the battlefield. There's a very specific land. Spoiler alert, it's Field of the Dead. We want Field of the Dead. Entish Restoration, sacrifice a land, search our deck for 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. But if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, which Teval is, instead search our library for up to 3 basic lands and put it on the battlefield tapped, which is pretty good. Though the Profane has a land on the back of it, which is really good, but we probably just like, it's a land when we need it, but it's a kill spell when we don't. Harrow is sacrifice a land, search our deck for 2 basic lands. It's kind of Entish Restoration, but arguably worse. I don't know, it's good either way. Malakir Rebirth is a land on the backside, same thing as Sink in the Stupor, but Malakir Rebirth, if someone tries to kill Teval, we just say, nuh-uh, and then when he dies, he'll just return tapped. So we don't have to, like, recast him. And it's a land on the back. Realms Uncharted is a lose-lose. It's basically Fact or Fiction, but for lands. Search your deck for 4 lands with different names. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards, puts the chosen cards in your grave, and the rest into our hand. So basically, it's a lose-lose, right? Because we either want them in the grave and we can reanimate them easy, or we get them in our hand. So our opponent really only has, like, I don't know, like a turn, maybe like a turn to stop it. But it's like, it's a lose-lose. We're getting like Dark Depths, we're getting Field of the Deads, we're getting copy lands. It's rough. Sink in the Stupor is like a counter spell, a bounce spell, and it's also a land if we need it. Going into artifacts, we have Arcane Signet because it's attached for any color. Ashnod's Altar really just for a sack outlet because we do make a good amount of tokens. So just like having them is pretty good. Conduit of Worlds also really great. Lets us play lands from our graveyard, and if we're feeling risky, we can just, you know, play a creature or non-land permanent really from our grave if we have nothing else going on. But that's kind of desperation mode. Crucible of Worlds lets us play lands from our grave. Lightning Greaves we slap right onto the commander so we can attack right away and so no one can target it. And when we attack right away, we do the attack ability. Phyrexian Altar is the ideal for like Gravecrawler type effects where we just sacrifice the tokens we make, sacrifice Gravecrawler, reanimate and make infinite mana, make a lot of dudes. Really good. Sol Ring is Sol Ring, and Zurin Orb just lets us sacrifice our lands to gain 2 life, which is really good because imagine like we have Splendid Reclamation on the field, like on the stack, and we just sacrifice all our lands, gain a ton of life, and just return them all to the battlefield anyway. Still pretty good. Going into enchantments, we have Exploration that just let us drop an additional land. Insidious Roots is really nice. It gives our creature tokens the ability to tap for mana of any color. And then whenever 1 or more creature cards leave our graveyard, create a 0/1 green plant creature token, then put a 1/1 counter on each plant we control. So it's kind of like Avenger of Zendikar's ability, but a little bit different. When our creatures leave, whether they return to our hand, they get exiled, go back to the field, whatever. Phyrexian Reclamation will let us do exactly that. Return target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. So then in that case, we would make a plant and then put a 1/1 counter on each plant we control, which gets bigger and bigger. So really nice. And Phyrexian Reclamation is just good reanimate. Like, oh, someone killed like Azusa. We'll get it back. Why not? Ripples of Undeath. At the beginning of pre-combat, mill 3, then we can pay 1 mana and 3 life to put the card from among them into our hand. So it's still going to our grave, and now it's just going to our hand. So a card's leaving our graveyard, which is nice. Spelunking enters, draw a card, then we may put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield. If we have a cave, which I think we have 1 of, we gain 4. And then lands enter untapped, which is really nice because most of the abilities that reanimate all lands put them into play tapped. Teval's Judgment. Brand new card for the commander. Only really the only card in the commander deck I think is worth running, honestly. Whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, choose 1 that hasn't been chosen this turn. Draw a card, make a treasure, or make a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token, which is good either way, right? Because we're doing, like, ideally we're reanimating a lot of lands every single turn. We're sacrificing them, reanimating them a lot frequently. So ideally we're getting all of that in a single turn. But even so, like, just drawing an extra card and making an extra body is still really nice. Final enchantment is Walk-in Closet to let us play lands from our graveyard. And then if we crack it up to 5 on a big turn, we may cast spells from our graveyard, and if they would go anywhere if they would be put into our graveyard, we just exile them instead. So like any instants or sorceries, like they're gone forever, or if someone blows up whatever, they're gone. But it just kind of lets us play our graveyard for a turn for 5 mana, which is nice. Going into lands, we just run all of the shock lands. We run all of these little surveil lands to help enable us good card advantage. And all of the fetch lands. I don't run off-color fetches. I'm not a sweaty nerd. Just kidding, I am. But I don't think running off-color I just don't like running off-color fetches, right? Like, to me, it's kind of going around the spirit of the color restrictions, where it's like, is it legal to run, like, a blue, white, like, let's say, like, I can't even think of a shock or a fetch land off the top of my head. Windswept Heath, white green. You could run Windswept Heath in this deck, but I think it's kind of like, it's like, you can legally, but like it's against like the spirit in my head. It's like, I don't like doing it. But either way, all the fetch lands. Going into the other lands, we have Bojuka Bog, which lets us, again, the idea is we're always casting these things, like we're sacrificing them and looping them over and over again. So Bojuka Bog's nice because we can just repeatedly exile graveyards. Boseiju, we want to discard to just pop an artifact, enchantment, or non-basic, and then like cards like Life from the Loam will put it back in our hand. Command Tower taps for any color. Dark Depths is super, super sick. It enters the battlefield with 10 ice counters on it. We can remove an ice counter for 3 mana, but we'll probably never doing that. But when Dark Depths has no ice counters on it, sacrifice it. If we do, create Merit Lodge, a legendary flying 20/20 with indestructible. That's pretty crazy, right? So the way this works is we have like any of the lands we have that copy it, right? We'll trigger Dark Depths right away and we'll get the 20/20. I'll skip Dryad Over for a second, but Echoing Deeps. You may have Echoing Deeps enter the battlefield tapped as a copy of any land card in your graveyard, except it's a cave in addition to its other types, and it's tapped for a colorless. So in this example, if Dark Depths is in our graveyard, right, and Echoing Deeps comes into play, we can have Echoing Deeps enter the battlefield as a copy of Dark Depths, and since Echoing Deeps has no ice counters on it, right away, it just flips into Merit Lodge, which is really cool. Dryad Arbor, super sick. It's a land, Forest Dryad. So any of like the cards that care about lands entering or creatures entering, we trigger off Dryad Arbor, and it is a land. We can loop it. We just can't tap it right away because it is a creature. Echoing Deeps, it's good. It copies any land in our grave, which is nice. Fabled Passage, it's just an easy fetch land for basics. If we don't like need, say, a shock land or a Triumph, we don't want to lose the life, it's good. Field of the Dead is the biggest stink in the deck. It is probably the best card. Whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. The whole idea with a lot of cards in this deck is copying Field of the Dead. If we can copy Field of the Dead, like if we have like even 2 Field of the Deads on deck, and we're like, I don't know, playing 5 lands from our graveyard a turn, like that's 5 or 10 zombies. That's like crazy. Odawara is the same logic as Boseiju. We want to just discard it and then return it back with like Life of the Loam, those kind of abilities. Phyrexian Tower, we make just incidentally a lot of tokens, so sacrificing them for black is not that bad. Reliquary Tower is nice because it gives us no max hand size. Shifting Woodlands enters the battlefield tapped unless we control a forest. Hopefully we do. And then we can pay 4 mana to make it become a copy of target permanent card in your graveyard until end of turn, which is Dark Depths, that triggers sacrifice the Shifting Woodland to make a 20/20 flying indestructible. So that's what that's there for. And if not, if we have like Field of the Dead in our grave and we want to go crazy for a turn, that's also an option. Strip Mine is brutal. We're not above strip locking people. So strip locking is sacrifice Strip Mine, destroy target land. When we're playing multiple land cards from our graveyard a turn, we can just keep getting Strip Mine and blowing up our opponent's lands. It's scummy, it's grimy. Does it win games? Hell yeah, it does. Like, it wins games. It's a very real win con. So making sure our opponents have no resources while still proccing all of our stuff is very good. Takinuma, again, same thing, Boseiju, Odawara. We want to discard it, do the ability, and then we want to reanimate it with like Life from the Loam back to the hand to see if we can repeatedly do it. Thespian Stage, we're copying Dark Depths, we're copying Field of the Dead. It's a copy land. Tomb of Yawgmoth, Urborg, each land is a swamp in addition to its other types. I don't know. it's better than just running a regular swamp, I guess. It lets like cards like Vesuva and Wasteland tap for black. So since we have a decent amount of colorless lands, it kind of helps enable them. Vesuva enters the battlefield tapped as a copy of Dark Depths or Field of the Dead, which then triggers, you know, the 2020 right away. Wasteland, worst strip mine, sacrifice it to destroy target non-basic land. But again, a lot of people run non-basic lands, and limiting their resources while enabling ourselves is pretty good. The final two, we have Yamimaya, Cradle of Growth. It's better than just a basic forest, and again, it lets all of our lands tap for green. Just like Urborg, we have both. All of our lands are just untapped values, essentially. Pretty good. Zagoth Triumph, it's fetchable, it's tutorable, enters tapped, taps for any color, and we can cycle it away later if need be. Going into basics, we have 4 forests, 3 islands, and 2 swamps, which is pretty good. Like we're basically green heavy, but like we went down a little bit because we have like the Yavimaya, and the swamps we went down a little bit because we have like Urborg and Bajukabog, and then each of them have their own Kamigawa land that channels. So the 7 basics sounds low, but it's really not too bad. That's all I got for you guys. Get the cards you need from the link right down below. As always, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.